All right, in this video, I'm going to explain a little bit by what Kant means by autonomy. And this is going to mean we're actually going to go a little bit out of order, or I'm going to be approaching these concepts in an order different than the order Kant does it in the text. And the reason for this is I think he actually kind of has a little bit of a jumble out of it. It'll become clear. So, what is autonomy? Well, the word autonomy comes from the Greek words auto and nomos. Auto meaning self, and nomos meaning law. So a being is autonomous if it gives itself the law. A thing is autonomous if it gives itself a law. You're most likely to run across the word autonomy nowadays in a political context. So a minority group or some national group within a larger multinational state might demand autonomy for themselves. So to give an example, the people of Scotland have been have actually achieved a kind of autonomy within the United Kingdom. Scotland has its own parliament. But that idea there is the Scottish people as a group can now give themselves their own laws. They have their own lawmaking body. But Kant doesn't mean it in the political context. He means it in the first-person context. So to say that someone has autonomy means that they give themselves the law. They decide the laws under which they behave. And that takes us to a distinction I made in an earlier video. Difference between descriptive and prescriptive laws. Prescriptive laws are the laws of morality. And descriptive laws are the laws Kant often says of physics. Now you might wonder, how are these similar, right? Morality and physics don't seem like they're much the same thing. What's going on here, right? Why call these both laws? Well, according to Kant, it's because we are able, unlike everything else in the natural world, to behave in accordance not just with the descriptive laws, right? So like the laws of physics apply to us. There's things your body, like you can't move faster than the speed of light, right? But we can also behave in accordance with laws not that just sort of constrain us the way the laws of physics do, but laws that we, as Kant says, represent to ourselves. We can think about the law and then intentionally act in accordance with it. So what Kant thinks is there are prescriptive laws that can explain our behavior because we choose to act in accordance with them. And this is something I'm going to have to get to in a later video, not that far in the future, I hope. Kant thinks fundamentally it's these prescriptive laws that explain our behavior, not the descriptive laws of physics, because Kant's going to get into the topic of free will. But we give ourselves the law means that we can think about laws that tell us how to behave, so prescriptive laws, and we can make decisions about whether to obey those laws or not. We can make decisions about whether to obey the laws of morality or not. We can also make decisions about whether some prescriptive law is actually a moral law, right? So you could be told, for example, that you always ought to obey state authority. And that's a prescriptive law. It's not the moral law that Kant talks about. Nowhere does he say that that's the categorical imperative, although he does in one work say there is some reason to always obey the authorities, but leave that aside for now. That's not important for what we're talking about now. That law, always obey the authorities, is one that you can think about and ask yourself, all right, this is a prescriptive law, but is this a prescriptive law that's a genuine moral law or not? And the way you would figure that out is by referring it to the categorical imperative and saying, all right, does this law always obey authority? Does that follow from the categorical imperative or not? So you can make decisions about whether a prescriptive law is actually binding on you, that is, whether it's actually a moral law, and then you can decide whether to obey it. So there's those two senses in which we give ourselves the law. We act according to laws that we give to ourselves. That's what it is to be autonomous. And this sets us apart from everything else in the natural world, according to Kant. So we have that autonomy is the ability to act according to laws that we give ourselves. Oops. Okay. So, this is what makes us special. This is what sets us apart. Another way of putting this, although he's not going to get into that until the third chapter of the Groundwork, is that Kant is basically saying we have free will. We have the ability to make our own mind up, to make decisions, and to control our own behavior by those decisions. And this sets us apart from everything else in the natural world, and Kant thinks sets us above everything else in the natural world. So now we have an explanation, or a potential explanation, for why we should obey the moral law. Because remember from the previous video, Kant thinks nothing in the natural world outside of our own minds has the kind of objective value that would make it the case that there could be moral laws telling you to promote that thing, right? So pick anything you want, the smile of innocent children, right? The smiles of innocent children. You might think, oh, that's great. We should try to make innocent children smile more, and guilty children can go to hell, I guess. What Kant's going to say is, no, that doesn't have unconditional value. It doesn't have intrinsic value. Things like the smiles of children are only valuable, Kant thinks, because people desire them. Right? That's the only sense in which they're valuable. Their value depends on us. Now, why would it be the case that the value of things like that depends on us? Kant thinks the value of natural beauty, in a sense, depends on our liking it. The value of all sorts of things in the world, right, depends on our choosing to pursue it. Why should we be able to make things valuable, and why should our decisions be the only source of value out in the world? Well, the explanation is going to be that unlike everything else in the world, we have autonomy. Right? We can actually make decisions about what to do. We can make decisions about what to pursue. Everything else in the world, Kant sort of thinks of as it's just one big machine operating in accordance with the laws of physics. Right? And without us there, without us around to sort of project value onto it, it wouldn't have any value of its own. It would just be a machine, right, running to no purpose. This special status that we have as autonomous beings is going to explain why both material ends, right, the goals you might have to make things happen out in the world, can't be moral ends or moral goals. But it also explains how we can have a moral law at all. Because it's this thing, autonomy, that is the thing that has inherent, intrinsic, unconditional value. You can think of it this way. Every human being has autonomy. When autonomy is used correctly, right, when we give ourselves the law in a good way, and we'll explain what that is in a minute, or in fact, I already sort of have explained with it, but I'll make clear what the explanation is in a minute. When we use the autonomy we have in an appropriate way, then we have a goodwill. And the very first sentence of chapter 1 was the goodwill is the only thing that's unconditionally good. Autonomy is the precondition of having a goodwill. Nothing can have a goodwill without autonomy. A goodwill is one that chooses good freely, right? Chooses to do the right thing freely. But that means we need to be free. It means we need to have the ability to decide which laws we obey and which we don't. So every human being has autonomy. Not every human being has a goodwill, but you need autonomy in order to have a goodwill. And so having autonomy makes every human being something Kant thinks of incomparably more value than anything else. This is a very human-centric moral theory in very similar ways to Aristotle and Plato. Neither Aristotle nor Plato really spent much time talking about the value of things besides human beings in our lives. So Kant sort of along in with them, the last author we're going to look at, John Stuart Mill, is going to have a very different approach. But we'll put that aside for now. So we are free autonomous beings. This gives us great inherent value, right? A value that nothing else besides human beings has. And this points us to another version of the categorical imperative. And it's called the formula of humanity. And here it is. The second version we're looking at. There's actually another version called the formula of natural law that I didn't spend any time on because it doesn't really do much different than the formula of universal law. And it only is in there because Kant has other commitments from other books I'm not going to have you read that forces him to have a formula of natural law. But the formula of humanity, as it's called, is this. Act in such a way as to treat humanity, whether in your own person or in that of anyone else, always as an end and never merely as a means. So we have now two formulations of the categorical imperative. And remember, according to Kant, these are equivalent. And by equivalent, it means every time you apply them, they'll get the same answer, right, in the same situation. Right? So if you're facing a moral question, what Kant thinks is the formula of universal law and the formula of humanity both will give you the same answer when you apply them. The difference between them is both how they're, according to him, how they're derived, and in a sense also what they highlight. So the formula of universal law highlights that you need to have a law-like principle that you're acting on. And for it to be law-like is for it to be universalizable. The formula of humanity gives you a sense of like what you should be valuing. Not so much the principle you're acting on, but what you should be valuing. But let me explain a little bit about what the formula of humanity actually says. So there are a couple key terms in here that we need to think about. One is humanity. Another is end and means. Humanity here doesn't mean all the human beings in the world. It means a property that every human being has, but not everything about all those human beings. And to explain, think about all the things that are true of you, but are also true of other creatures. You might remember this is very similar to an approach Aristotle took with the function argument. What Kant is saying with humanity is the distinctive features of human beings. So there's a lot of things about us that are not distinctive. Our ability to desire things, right? And a lot of the desires we actually have are not distinctive, right? We want food, we like sweet tasting food, we want to rest, we want to, get them run around. We want sex, we want to reproduce, we want all sorts of things like that all sorts of animals have. Right? Those aren't distinctive about us. Those aren't what make us human beings, Kant thinks. What makes us human beings is our basically autonomy. It's that thing that we have that nothing else has, that ability to freely choose how to behave, to freely choose the principles on which we act. And so that's what we have to think about when we're thinking about humanity. So we're being told to always act in such a way that you treat humanity, whether in yourself or others, always as an end, never merely as a means. Now, a means, if I haven't already made this clear, I think I might not have actually, the means are steps you take in order to get something, right? So let's say you have a goal. My goal right now is to complete these videos so I can put them online. And if that's my goal, the means I take are, well, for example, because I'm recording this in the time of coronavirus, I stay up late so that I have more hours after like my kids go to bed where it's quiet and I can record. Right? I also try to put my cat upstairs so it wouldn't be downstairs and making noise all the time. Those were means. Those were steps I took in order to pursue the goal of getting the video recorded. Right? Means are just any steps you take to achieve some goal. They're like, their only value, their only use is as a way to get to a goal. You can think of means as kind of like tools you use in order to get what you want. They are, another way of putting it, instrumental goods, if you remember that term from talking about Plato and Aristotle. And so that's what it is to be a means. It's to be something that's used to get something else. It's to be of only instrumental goodness. It's to be treated as kind of like a tool or like a stepping stone or something like that. An end gets a little more complicated. In one straightforward sense, an end is just a goal you pursue, something you're trying to make happen. Right? So my end in the activity I'm doing right now is the creation of a video I can post to the course website. I'm trying to produce something. That's a perfectly legitimate sense of the word end. But that sense of the word end doesn't make sense here. If it did, it would sound like you're being told with this formula of humanity to try to produce as much autonomy as you can, which would seem to mean make as many people as you can, right? As long as they're going to end up being autonomous, have as many kids as possible. This then sounds like, you know, the biblical injunction to be fruitful and multiply. That's not what he means. Another way that something can be an end is just as something that you value, but that you can't really make happen, right? Or is not a good that can be produced. So an example, a very common example, is self-preservation. You value your own self-preservation. Your self-preservation is an end of yours. But it's not like you're going to make as much self-preservation as you can. It's not like self-preservation is something you don't have that you're going to produce, right? It's usually not even the goal of your action. It can sometimes be. If you're in an emergency situation, maybe your self-preservation is the straightforward goal of your action. But usually, the way self-preservation enters into your reasoning about how you're going to behave is you want something else. And if it's sufficiently dangerous, the fact that one of your goals in life sort of is to not die comes in and says, well, hold on, right? I know you really, really want to be excited right now, but jumping out of that plane is not the way to go because it threatens self-preservation. So there are some goals you have that they're not things you actively pursue very often, maybe ever, but they do play a role in your behavior, usually by sort of constraining other ends you have, right? So like I really like, here's an example. I really, really like going to the famous European cities. I was born in Europe. I grew up for a large part of my life in Europe. I like going back there. And right now, Paris and Berlin and London and Rome are all kind of empty. Right. And I was one of those stupid people who, when I saw those pictures of like an empty Rome and like there's no tourists at the Colosseum, thinking, maybe I go now, right? Take a flight to Italy and just walk around Rome without any other, you know, stupid people there with me. I would be the only stupid person walking around. That's a goal I have, but my self-preservation goal jumps in, right, and says, nope, right? It's not a good idea. So ends can be sort of standing goals you have that mostly work by constraining the other goals you have. Right? Another example besides self-preservation might be showing proper respect to like your parents or family members. Like probably you don't have a lot of projects that are just show respect for your family members. You probably don't often wake up in the day and think, I'm going to find a way to show respect to my family members. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't. But if you're thinking of doing something that might disrespect them, then that standing goal of yours comes in and restrains you, right? If you're thinking like, well, my parents aren't here at home, maybe I could throw a wild party, right? Because it'll be fun because I like parties. Then your standing goal of respecting your parents comes in and constrains you. And that's the sense in which you're supposed to treat humanity as an end. You're supposed to at all times have as one of your constraining ends out there the respect for humanity as a whole, right? But respect for the humanity within each human being, which is the respect for the decision-making power, the autonomous decision-making power of human beings. So you should always act so that you're treating that as an end, meaning you're treating that as a constraint on your behavior. Right? That you're never going to treat other human beings as merely tools of yours. You're never going to say, like, well, I will use this person to get whatever I want. Now that's different. I underlined the word merely here because there is a confusion, right, that some people sometimes have about Kant. That he's saying never treat people as means. Never use people to further your own ends, your own goals. And that would be a crazy idea. That would involve society and civilization coming to a quick end. You use people as means all the time. You are using me as a means right now. You are interacting with me, such as we are with this class, for the purpose of getting the credit, right? The 3 credits that you're going to get for this class. Similarly, I am interacting with you, such as we are, to get paid. I would not do this for free. I am using you for money. You are using me for college credits. And hopefully, I mean, what most of you are probably thinking is, I'll use those college credits to get money down the line because it'll get me to that 120 number, and then I graduate, and then I can get a good job. Maybe some of you are using me for knowledge and not just money. That'd be nice. But I'm definitely using you for money. And that's fine. Kant's not saying you can never treat people as means. I mean, imagine what like going to the restaurant would be like if you couldn't use someone else's means. The waiter is your means to get your food. The waiter and the chef together, I guess. Right? Imagine if you weren't able to use them as means, right? You're like, I want to eat some really nice food. So you go to the restaurant and then you go into the kitchen. You're like, I'll make my own. Don't worry. That's insane. But Kant's not saying that. He's saying never use them merely as means. You can treat someone as means without treating them merely as means. The way I treat my waiter as a means, but not merely as a means, is I take account of the fact that the waiter should also be treated as an end and has that human feature of autonomy. The waiter gets to make their own decisions about how they behave. And so I would treat them merely as a means if I disregarded that. Now, how would I disregard their ability to make their own decisions? Well, we are, me and the waiter, involved in a transaction. And there are certain conditions under which we're willing to engage in the transaction. I am only willing to engage in the transaction if the waiter doesn't spit my food. Right? The waiter is only willing to engage in the transaction if I pay the waiter. Right? Usually partly through tips. Some of what the waiter gets paid goes through the food, but this is America where I'm taping this, and we rely on the tip system, which is like a bad system, but whatever. It would be to treat the waiter merely as means if I go in there knowing that the waiter has the expectation that they're going to be tipped if they do a good job, or even like an okay job. And to not inform them that I intend to not tip them and then not tip them. Right? So I would be treating them merely as a means. I would be taking no account of their ability to make up their own mind about the conditions under which they're willing to do this job. Everyone knows the conditions under which waiters are willing to do the job of being a waiter is to get tips, at least in America. If I go in there knowing that's true and I let them serve me my food and then I don't tip them, I am using them merely as a means. I know that they wouldn't engage in this interaction with me if they knew that I wasn't going to tip them, and I'm just manipulating them by not giving them the information that if they had it, they would then refuse to take part in the transaction with me. Similarly, if I were to do the following, something students have sometimes asked me to do, which is just give everybody a good grade and don't teach. Right? So I've had students try to convince me, here's what you should do with the semester. Back when I was teaching face-to-face. You should show up and you should say, nobody has to come back. Nobody tell anybody I said this, but I'm going to give you all A's or B's by flip of a coin, but no one's going to get lower than a B. Is it a deal? Right? So that I get paid, you get grades, you get credit, no one has to do any work. That would be treating, in a sense, you as mere means. Although if you agreed to it, maybe it wouldn't be treating you as mere means. But it would definitely be treating my employer as mere means. My employer would not have hired me and would not pay me to be a professor if they knew I was going to do that. Right. So treating someone as an end means always taking into account their ability to make their own decisions, which means always taking into account the conditions under which they are willing to engage freely in a relationship of any kind with you, right? So if they're willing to, there's economic relationships, there's romantic relationships, right? There's civic relationships. We have the ability sometimes to take advantage of others, to force them to be a part of a relationship that they don't want to. Right? I can force the waiter to serve me food under conditions they would never freely choose to serve me food by deceiving them. I could also do it by threatening them, right? So the waiter could come up to my table and say, "Hi, how are you doing? We have the following specials." I'd be like, "Hold on, hold on, hold on. I'm not going to tip you, but you're going to serve me and you're going to do a great job of it. Because if you don't, I'm going to pull out this gun and I'm going to shoot your toes off. All your toes. You'll be toeless." I mean, if they don't call the cops, right? Because I say, "Oh, and if you call the cops, then I'm taking your knees too." They'll probably do the work of bringing me the food, right? But I will have ignored their ability to make their own choice about the conditions under which they will engage in this relationship with me. As long as you always take account of that, as long as you don't override that, as long as you don't force people to engage in these relationships of mutual use where we treat each other as means, as long as you don't disregard the conditions under which they're willing to do that freely, then you're not treating them as mere means. Right? And you are treating them as an end. You can treat people, the point is, as both an end and a means at the same time. Right? But what you're never allowed to do is treat them merely as a means by disregarding their ability to make up their own mind about how they're going to relate with you. So that's the formula of humanity. There are two more formulations of the categorical imperative that we're going to cover, but we're not going to cover them in this video.